Hi there, welcome back to another episode of the BARROW Podcast. If you haven't already, please think about following us or giving us a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you find the show. So today's episode, instead of a book episode, I'm going to start by reading an article that I was in the process of having published. And I've decided, well, maybe I can talk about the publication journey of this particular article, but I will be posting it on the Substack for free tomorrow. So you can go and find it there and read it there, should you like. Okay. Reckoning with a legacy of divorce and infidelity, trickier for some. Now, Mum hasn't heard this article or read this article all the way through, but I thought this was the opportunity to do it. So, here we go. You ready?
Yes.
Yes. My father left Mum and I in 1991, 2 weeks before my third birthday. While there were other factors relevant to their separation, primary was my father's sexuality. He'd left to pursue a same-sex relationship. It goes without saying I'm writing from direct personal experience, not with the intention of inflicting harm or causing offence. There are better stories than mine, and by better, I mean nicer, happier ones. Divorce is sometimes necessary, and amidst the raft of divorce stories, some provide levity, enrichment, and positive generative opportunities to family members. But this wasn't my experience. My father's sexuality has remained a meaningless fact to me, all things considered. He was a lousy father in such a stereotypical way that it's absurd to factor this in when evaluating him as a parent. Yet, I'm conflicted between a sincere desire to understand and sympathise with my father's pain and my protective feelings for my mother. As a child of divorce burdened with knowing about a parent's infidelities, and in my frustration with so-called progressive discourses that have at times appeared exceedingly narrow. I lost work during COVID after the commencement of lockdowns and moved home in the last months of 2020. I hadn't lived with Mum since I was 21, and we'd never been good at communicating. Kingsley wants to come in. Oh my Lord. Your timing is impeccable. Impeccable, as always. Okay, let me take that again. I lost work during COVID after the commencement of lockdowns and moved home in the last months of 2020. I hadn't lived with Mum since I was 21, and we'd never been good at communicating, but I was shocked by the state of things when I returned. She'd been an anxious and self-conscious person when she met my father, but her divorce had destroyed her, shattering what little confidence remained and exacerbating her fears and doubts. She never remarried, never even dated, and believed wholeheartedly that what had happened surmised something essential about her as a woman. 30 years later, her emotional and psychological inertia had manifested physically. Our home sliding into decay. Throughout 2021, I set to fixing the place up. I refurnished the house, pulled out the garden, removed the rotted patio, and dealt with the rats infesting the roof. Among my missions was to address the boxes stacked to the ceiling and filling the entire two-car garage. Months of sweating in dust, mouse droppings and cobwebs resulted in a discovery I'd not been prepared for. Amongst hundreds of boxes bearing 4 generations worth of artefacts were dozens preserving my estranged father's belongings, including photographs, wedding mementos, clothes, art, school reports, and work assignments he'd completed during his training course and later in the job he'd held when my parents were married. "Why do you still have all this?" I asked Mum. "He didn't take it when he left," was all she said. It was as devastating to realise he'd left so much behind as that she'd kept it. I didn't know what was sadder. His belongings recalled the nature of his desertion. Literally, he'd packed a bag and left on a day he knew my mother and I would be away from the house without leaving so much as a phone number or forwarding address. In the months that followed, he was uncontactable. And in the years thereafter, he demonstrated nothing except hostility toward anything reminding him of his old life. Mum and I had been utterly dispensable. When many years later, university peers, upon learning the single fact of my father's sexual orientation, would remark, "Oh, so he came out? That's cool," I would say no, he left. Sometime later, sorting through my father's effects, I came upon financial, legal, and medical documents. I knew he'd been assaulted while attending a beat when my parents were still married, but the extent of the assault was unknown to me. At the time, 1987, he'd insisted the assault was part of a mugging gone wrong, but the medical documents attested to the true nature of the assault. A report from a physician following the incident detailed a bashing so severe it had left my father with partial facial paralysis and the temporary loss of senses on the same side of the head. Around the time I discovered these files, I was following the Special Commission of Inquiry in New South Wales examining the police approach to suspected hate crimes against gay men and women from 1970 to 2010. The inquiry troubled me. It attested to an entrenched culture of homophobia that made violence permissible, as well as a pervasive culture of silence and repression broadly that made homosexuality needlessly taboo. In so many ways, the inquiry appeared emblematic of Australia's core dysfunctions: a lack of interest in or awareness of domestic history, fear of addressing difficult topics, and an inability to engage meaningful discourses. Troubling me also was that by default the inquiry might relegate gay bashing to a New South Wales phenomenon in the eyes of the public when the crimes remain a national disgrace. One estimate suggested 20 men were bashed every day over the 40-year period under investigation. Such prevalence cannot be limited to a single state, surely. The burden of knowing about a parent's infidelities is an especially heavy one and can cause immense distress for a child of any age, regardless of whether this is something learned during their parents' marriage or in the aftermath of separation. For children of gay parents, the cultural and historic context of such infidelities can amplify a unique tension. In such cases, the torn allegiances between respective guardians takes on an additional layer in the form of divided allegiances within the self. An allegiance to basic black and white morality on the one hand, and an allegiance to one's personal standards of empathy and understanding on the other. Cheating is basically wrong, one tells themselves as if they were a child. But if the offending party exists in a moment in history when they're persecuted, are they exempt? Surely this is different, isn't it? But can historic mistreatment of a cultural group account entirely for my father's behaviour? And even if it could, what does this leave me with? Should I be comforted? In 2013, I was 25 and returning home on the train after work when I bumped into a colleague. We struck up conversation, and having completed our task for the day, we chose to continue talking back at her flat. Over a few joints, we talked writing. She confided she was failing to produce a short story inspired by an incident involving her father. I asked what it was about. "My father is gay," she said. "He got bashed when he was a young man." Something about my face caught her off guard. "What?" she asked. I told her we shared this in common and that I'd never met anyone with a similar experience before. It turned out neither had she. In the time and place we'd grown up, there were no so-called blended or rainbow families. Parents like ours often left their marriages after years attempting to conceal their sexuality. These weren't positive, identity-affirming stories. These marriages could end badly, and the fallout could become the stuff of secrets, shame, and trauma. I'd kept my own family story secret throughout my schooling and into my 20s, fearing reprisals in the macho culture of an all-boys Catholic secondary where I'd witnessed severe acts of bullying. That afternoon, my colleague and I swapped stories. We'd each been very young when our fathers left. We were both only children who'd gone on to be raised by single mothers. I asked if she'd seen her father much growing up, admitting I had only seen my dad on weekends and that I'd been afraid of him. Dad didn't scare me, she said. I think he was just ashamed. I don't know. But it messed everything up so much. Mum struggled, and I watched that, and he just stayed away and didn't help us, and it made me so mad. I asked what her story was about, the one she was struggling to write, wanting to know if she was trying to tell it from her father's perspective, and if so, why. She rolled another joint and thought about it. Finally, she said, I think I'm using it as a way of getting over my anger, trying to put myself in his shoes or something. Yeah. It's a story I heard, that he was attacked. He was hanging out in some bar and it seems like he tried to make a pass at someone and anyway. She described the town where she'd grown up, a backward rural place far from the city she was now residing in. It was almost exactly like the one where my father was raised, where I used to visit as a boy. I mean, what options did he really have, she went on. There's no gay bar where we're from, not then anyway. I agreed it would have been painful. But then I go to write this story, she said, and I just can't. Every time I sit down to write it, I just end up so angry. And not for my father either. Well, that too, sometimes. But really, I'm so mad at him. I hate that he got beat up, of course. But I hate that when he did, he was married. I hate that for Mum. Like on the one hand, something really terrible happened to my father, to my dad. But then on the other, he was cheating on Mum. Trying to anyway. I just don't know what to do with that. As I got older, I became increasingly open about my upbringing. While this could be liberating, I also observed a peculiar trend. If I omitted the detail of my father's sexuality, my story was almost always interpreted sympathetically, and my father was typically condemned. If my father's sexuality was revealed, however, then my story was often challenged, and my father was perceived variously as a misunderstood victim, a bad guy, but ... and sometimes even as a martyr. In certain circles, accompanying the latter reception would come select sentiments. Some informed me that my father was, quote, brave for, quote, coming out, while others insisted I was, quote, lucky to have a, quote, special parent of whom I could be, quote, proud. A university peer chastised me for being critical of a minority group who'd suffered greatly, telling me I couldn't and wasn't trying hard enough to understand my father's plight. A publisher informed me my story wasn't what society, quote, needs right now, and tried to explain that my, quote, views were potentially, quote, harmful. I was wounded by all of this. My father's desertion had shaped the trajectory of my life, but at university and within arts organisations, my experiences could sometimes be invalidated due to a perceived hierarchy of identity and an insistence upon ironically rigid social and political ideologies. This contradicted the messaging within spaces that encouraged, quote, new and underrepresented voices and privileged the wisdom of so-called, quote, lived experience, fundamentally contravening the very knowledge my experiences had imparted. It also said a lot about social class in Australia. The language of identity politics and progressivism was alluring to an educated middle class who were susceptible to overestimating the value of language for its own sake. These experiences troubled me about cultural and family life in Australia and its messaging. I was left confused by what I saw as a shift in the tenets of feminism and by how easily we accepted divorce, and I was concerned by what this communicated to children. After the introduction of no-fault divorce in 1975, 68% of divorces involved children under 18. This percentage steadily declined to a little over 50% by 1999. Since the turn of the millennium, it has remained consistently in a range of roughly 48 to 52%, But these percentages don't account for separations between non-married couples who have an increased likelihood of separating. The impact of divorce on children hasn't changed. Children who experience divorce have an increased chance of developing mental illnesses later in life, and the effects of divorce on behaviour, academic achievement, mental health and social relationships amongst children is well documented. If my story was moved from a divorce story to an identity story, then Mum's experiences were to count for nothing. In the wake of her divorce, Mum was sometimes ribbed. She was silly, how naive, and subject to snide speculation. What do you mean she didn't know? Because of my father's sexuality, there was something trivial about her life, her marriage, and her subsequent divorce. These sentiments were predicated on homophobic notions of the gay man as ineffectual and effete, and therefore unimpactful and ultimately inferior, and they made light of Mum's personal shame, obfuscating the pain of a common experience. Like countless women, she'd been subject to the whims of an unfaithful man before being discarded and saddled with the primary care and economic burden of rearing a child. In the years after he left, my father would squander the money he'd earned in a divorce settlement that forced Mum and I out of our home, go bankrupt, and fail to honour his child support obligations. And while my father's victimisation had the AIDS crisis as its backdrop, so too did his infidelities and Mum's life by extension. After he left, the same family doctor who'd referred my father onto specialists in the aftermath of his assault would inform Mum of the necessity that she and I now be tested for hepatitis C and HIV. I picture her at 35 sitting in a doctor's office with a little boy on her knee, her mind whirring with endless worries about her finances and employment and whatever divorce proceedings might bring. Her life is in tatters. She is ushered into a room to have her blood taken by a nurse before watching her son's blood drawn, a new fear overwhelming the rest. Nobody should need to conceal an aspect of their identity in order to survive. For children, much the better to have parents who know themselves and who are safe to live as they please. Children need love above all, no matter who it's from, and this starts with a culture in which people are permitted to love themselves. It begins with acceptance and understanding, and to this end, I know progressivism is for the better. I wouldn't have lost a father from my life and experienced the disadvantages of this had he been given a chance at self-acceptance. Pain begets pain, after all. Yet nor would I be here either. More people ought to know their domestic history. This too is for the better, I know. Context is not only important but necessary, yet the difficult truth is that in the cogs of progressive change, some will lose out. What must remain intact are our standards and respect for women and children, and an earnest appreciation for the legacy of divorce.
Wow.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's brilliant and it encapsulates every aspect.
Now,
without emotion or without screaming, listen to me.
No, I don't want to scream, listen to me.
No.
I am just a little bit tired of being told about my own story and about how I need to package things up. Now, to sort of quickly state that I have had difficulty publishing that article. Now, it is fascinating to me that I should have had difficulty publishing that article.
Of the era, which is what you allude to.
It's fascinating to me that I should have had trouble publishing that article because it is a good piece. I can say that, I'm not objective there, but, I know writing. It took me months and months to write. It's well researched, and really it's taken me 37 years to write it.
Yes.
And look, I don't have any judgment around sexuality and what has been so disappointing over the years, and obviously there's been this sort of little reveal within our story, which is that, you know, my father's sexuality, your ex-husband's sexuality is part of the story, but it's also not part of the story. I say in the article that, you know, we experienced divorce. We didn't experience somebody's identity, you know.
Basically, it was still a man deserting a family.
Yeah, and that's how it has been experienced by us. And that's really how I always, how I felt. My father's sexuality, you know, I've never had a problem with that. But the way that we have been positioned because of the new kind of discourse is that we've been positioned almost as homophobic for grieving and having difficulty with the divorce. Oh, what do you mean? Pick yourselves up. This is a gay identity story. And I'm going, no, it's not. This is a man doing to a woman and a child what men have done to women and children throughout history. And I simultaneously, I don't want to not acknowledge this aspect of our story, but I don't want to dwell on it. I don't want to blow it up. And I don't want to be at odds with anybody. And I want to say for the record that, well, there's a couple of things to say, but just quickly from my perspective, you know, my father is perhaps a bit of an outlier anyway, in that he has never been able to articulate either the words gay or homosexual.
Yeah.
There was a perception from people who I met at university, that kind of middle class educated group, that seemed to think that every gay person is running around waving a rainbow banner. And I'm going,
that's right.
I'm going, well, that wasn't my experience. I had somebody who was, you know, still to this day seemingly quite repressed in this aspect of their life, and unable to articulate it. But in that, making it kind of, oh, it's not a problem, but kind of making it a problem for you if you bring it up one way or the other, if you bring it up at all.
Yes, and I mean, I'd found that out for myself because, you know, we took, as you underline in that article, it's knowing yourself and the damage that comes from not knowing yourself. And I think it was always my point that we could have sat down and talked about that.
But he would not do it.
Yeah.
And
so then it becomes this.
And the same goes for
elephant
me.
in the room.
The same goes for me in my sexual development. Like, there seems to be this perception that because I have a gay parent, that I have lived some sort of liberal, bohemian adolescence, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You know, my father was always to me a staunchly conservative, rural, repressed man who was very angry and had problems, and that's all he was to me. That he was gay, I couldn't have cared less. I really couldn't have. And in as much as, yeah, sure, okay, my father's gay. I know that.
Yeah.
But can't we sort of talk? Can't you be a father to me? And this is the point, is that he was not. And in terms of the effect on my maturation and adolescence and sexual development, my father never put an arm around me and said, hey, just don't make the mistakes I did, be true to yourself.
Yeah.
He never came to me and asked me, do I have feelings for men or women? You know, none of that. His shame and his repression, and again, which I touch on, which is historic, and it's a disgrace what's been done to the gay community in this country. And again, you lose the shame and the homophobia, then you lose the repression, and then you lose what's happened to us.
Yes.
But what has happened to us is real. And
and that certainly gets forgotten in the story.
And that's our story. Yeah. That's not anger directed at the gay community. And I would hate, I hate being put in this position to almost defend myself against what might be perceived as kind of almost like homophobic, because you're not all accepting, all embracing. no, you have to understand the historic context, and then you have to understand this particular experience. And by the way, our experience is not uncommon. The fact that I ran into someone in my life who'd had the exact same experience, and by the way, the silence with people, they're so afraid to speak. They're so afraid to say, my parent left and they're gay and it was really tough, because you're meant to, as a good liberal, like celebrate it and championing it. But you can do both. You can champion and celebrate things and also speak directly about your, again, lived experiences. But what I found at university and in publishing was people were getting shut up on certain things. People were really getting like, no, we don't want to. We don't want to represent things that way.
That's what I've found as the wife in that situation.
Yeah.
It was an aspect. It was an aspect because there had not been the honest sit down.
No.
And then my the wives get lost in that.
Well, I want to touch on another article, and also like I'm conscious of letting you speak because like I've just read a whole article. Is there anything on this that you really want to say, or it's really summed up?
No, that's really summed up, and we've probably touched on it before. All I wanted was a conversation. That's all I wanted, and I sort of run myself ragged trying to get to have that conversation, and then I realised it was never going to happen. And you're talking to other people who've had similar experiences in terms of they've been left and they're a single mother, but there's aspects to our situation that make it different, and I think that just gets lost.
What is really hard to communicate to people, and what can't be lost here, is that my biological father, your ex-husband, has done a terrific job of really maligning us despite inflicting such a wound and such damage. Is that by his silence, he's almost saying, "Oh, you're homophobic." I'm not talking about it. He's more than said that. He has publicly condemned me as homophobic for bringing it up. He has been on Facebook saying that things that I wrote, basically, I just can't handle it. I can't handle that he's gay. And I'm going, no, you are the one who can't seem to handle anything.
We both were never given the chance to handle it. And I remember...
But there was nothing to handle. It's interesting how it flips. It goes from he lives a sham marriage to, what, you can't handle that I'm gay. And it's like, but hang on, you're the one who engaged.
You're the one making the issue.
You're the one who engaged a 14-year-long marriage and buried this fact about yourself.
Yes. And brought a child into the world.
And brought a child into the world that you left. And so you're talking about an individual who is just, a savage narcissist and a really deeply fucked up person, and his adoption is part of it.
Yes.
And in a way, we also have to be very careful to say that, like, we're not dealing with a regular case here. We're talking about a very specific person, but that doesn't make it untrue. This did happen. We did live through this, and I wanted, for my whole life, I've wanted to go on the record and say, no, this is actually quite unfair. This is really unfair, because I watched you struggle with, it was a double shame. You had the shame of your divorce, and then you were shamed by people either laughing at you, basically saying, oh, what do you mean you didn't know? Or giggling, which is so funny to me that there is, as I say in the article, almost this homophobia underscoring the sense that oh, it's just a gay man who left you. It's no effect. It's like,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah,
where I
sure.
turn around
Yeah.
and suddenly go, no, you're talking about my father who left me.
Yes. Yes.
It hurts.
Yes.
It doesn't get flipped around to become a celebration
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I find that deeply troubling. I've never been offended by anything, but I suppose I do find that a little offensive. And there are two other things I want to say. Because of my father's inability to embrace and accept and confront this aspect of his life, you know, as I say, we've been left in this very awkward position. And there's a magazine that I read occasionally that is a LGBT mag and has some great stories. And there was a story of a girl, well, she's a young woman now, whose mother came out, and her mother was part of the gay rights movement here in Melbourne, and a big figure in, you know, nationally as well. And she has this great relationship with her, and you're talking about people that came together because they were big enough to navigate the situation. And there are great stories. And I remember reading this and just feeling so much envy of like, it's not that you got a great gay parent, you just had a great parent. Like
That's
you had
exactly
someone
right.
who knew who was able to
Yes.
go through those processes of reconciliation
Yes.
and what have you, and bring you along, and now
Yes.
you're part of something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gee, you know, like the divorce and the abandonment, all that was so hard. But on top of it, you've got someone who just is so dismissive and
away.
batting it away.
Yeah, I remember.
And that's a real gaslighting
Yeah.
we're talking about.
I remember being on a retreat for single parents and coming across a woman who had a similar story, but then very dissimilar because she'd been able to continue a relationship with the partner who'd left, and that just adds a different dimension. It's because there's honesty there.
Yeah. And look, no one, again, what I said was that I was sort of troubled by a shift in a perceived shift from my perspective in the tenets of feminism. Like, when a woman's life is reduced to being a shield and then thrown away,
Yes.
you know, I can't think of any greater form of domestic abuse.
Yeah, that certainly gets lost.
And that suddenly is not even, it doesn't even get a look in. And I'm thinking, really, the feeling here is that you and I were basically, we serviced a person's needs to cultivate an image about themselves up until our services were no longer required, and then we were just ditched. And for that person to then go and be the hero of the story, that's a grave injustice. I'm sorry, it really is. And I cannot think of a greater form of domestic abuse than to use someone else's life as a vehicle to.
Yeah, and then you're not supposed to be affected by it. You the normal emotions of being left are even brushed away.
Yeah, it has been such a difficult experience, truly.
Yeah. And I always felt that that my story got sort of lost in that kind of environment.
You were maligned, like you really, it really was lost. Yeah, no, and I felt that all my life, sort of a kind of a low level, sort of just disbelief and upset, you know, on your behalf,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a few other things I wanted to say, which is that, you know, what has always troubled me about the way that discourse has gone is that there seems to be, everything's polarized. So there are two sides. So you're either saying something positive about the gay community and gay men generally, or you're saying something negative about them. And it's like, well, there are not two sides. There's only individual circumstances.
Yeah, that's right.
And I am at pains to say this was our experience.
Yes.
And nothing more than that. It does not carry out onto a whole group of people. It does not. It's not some sort of entrenched thing. And it's interesting. I've had some really private, honest conversations with gay men about this, and there was one really great conversation in particular where this really nice guy was sort of saying to me that like he felt that a lot of younger gay men were disconnected from their domestic history. They didn't really understand the struggles and the pain of the previous generations. And the pains and struggles of the previous generations, and what I would sort of say is that those pains and struggles of the previous generations include us. And I would like to see women like you and children like me included. And actually what that is saying is that I want to be seen as part of the LGBTQ plus community. Like I'm part of it through my story and my connection. I don't hold a grudge with that community. I'm really sympathetic, and I think that I have gone above and beyond an ordinary person to understand and research and whatever. And when it comes to my own sexual development, because of my father's repression, but also because of your father's attitudes, and we can talk about that, there is a confluence of factors here that have made my sexual identity really tough. I mean, I've always said I'm probably bisexual. There are things that there are aspects of my life I might have explored if I'd been in a more open environment. If my father had taken me under his wing and sort of showed me anything like love, anything like compassion, I'd probably have a much happier internal life, right? And I don't. And so that's tough and sad. And again, I'm at pains to say that is our experience alone. And I really hope no one takes offense to this. I mean, I'd be distraught if they did. I really deeply do not want to hurt anyone with our story. I just don't.
No, but it's a lived experience.
Absolutely.
And it's real.
Absolutely. And I think it's important. I mean, as discourse becomes more, as I say, polarized, I think this is important. Did you want to add to that, or should I touch on that other article?
No, touch on that other article, which I was pretty amazed at coming across in this current climate.
Yeah, so I, here in Australia, the AFL, which is the Football League, there was this sort of coming out story of Mitch Brown, who has identified as being bisexual. But what I wanted to point to was an article written by a contributor, a journo for The Age, called by the name of Gary Nunn. And Gary, if you hear this, get in touch. Because your work sounds great. So this is a sort of a historic thing, because the AFL have traditionally been, they've had their blinkers on with the whole, the AFL like to touch on social issues, but they don't actually represent any of them. They sort of, it's all in name only. But Nunn's article, which is Mitch Brown is not the only hero of his coming out story, goes on to say this, and I'm going to read some of it because I'm going to read the second half of it because I think it's really important. He talks about the fact that Mitch Brown's coming out has included the women in his life. And he goes on to write this. It's also, this in itself is also groundbreaking. In most cases, when a man comes out after being married to a woman, a rainbow garland is unfurled and people loudly celebrate his courageousness and that he can, quote, finally be himself, end quote. It comes from a good place of wanting to be a good LGBTQ ally, but what's often completely sidelined is the unheard voice of the woman he was married to or the woman he is currently with. She'll often remain silent for fear of accusations of homophobia, yet her voice really matters. Some of these women have been badly hurt. Others become LGBTQ allies. All tell a critical story. A society that is so hypermasculine and homophobic that some men still resort to a closeted double life harms everyone. Yeah. That's why the voice of Brown's female partners is so powerful. They're the unsung heroes of this. Their supportive messages told Brown how proud they were of him. When they were partners, Bolton and Brown, his ex-partner, likely faced biphobia, because Brown is bisexual, that prevented them from discussing it publicly. Female partners of bisexual men have to confront prejudices that her partner is greedy or indecisive or untrustworthy. Nunn says this, I've specialised in interviewing the female partners of men who come out as gay or bisexual. As a gay man, I could foster trust among these women by finding sympathy for them, while other gay men are too busy welcoming their newest community member to give his female partner a second thought. And see, that is an indictment on men, the way that men dispose of women. But anyway, the female partners of gay men often don't share the positive experience expressed by Browns. They navigate trauma and distress, often alone, left to face within their communities the taboo that their husbands felt they had to hide. So I heard moving stories of infidelity, HIV tests, lies, gaslighting, feelings of worthlessness, marriages feeling like shams and utter heartbreak. Some onlookers victim blame, claiming ex-wives were gullible and should have suspected. Meanwhile, their ex-husbands are often hailed as brave. Just one in-person free service in the world specifically helps these women. The Women Partners of Gay Bi Men service in Leichhardt, Sydney. That's the only one in the world. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, I think...
I'm nearly finished.
Sorry.
No, you go.
No, I think I just leapt for joy when I read that.
No, I know.
I think I just said, hey.
It was such a comfort.
Hey.
This has been such a comfort to read. It's a tiny article in the newspaper, but it's like, it's meant the world to us.
Someone knows there's another aspect to the story.
One woman whose ex-husband came out as gay flies from Melbourne to Sydney fortnightly to go to the, quote, life-saving meetings.
Wow. I'd forgotten about that part of the article.
It's telling that Roxanne McMurray, who's run the service for more than 20 years, shout out to Roxanne McMurray, if you want to talk to us, says it's been busier than ever. 250 women attend yearly. Yeah. Mitch Brown has been honest with the world, and the women in his life have joined the applause. It doesn't always turn out this way, but in a more open and inclusive society, it absolutely could. And great article, Gary. Nunn.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing that, because it really did mean a lot to the both of us. And I would say this, is that, just to add on here, is that why I think our story needs to be included by that LGBTQ community is because, we are for the inclusion of people for the sake that it means people like us don't happen in the future.
Yeah.
People like us aren't hurt in the future. You know, I don't want to live in a society where somebody has to repress something and then just do untold damage to others.
Yeah.
And there's a story. Do you want to run a little longer with this, and I might just tell one sort of tragic story?
Sure.
You'll know the story when I tell it. And here's another example of how tragic and serious these things can be, is that, you know, we know of a man who left his wife and children. I think he had 3 children. And he was a really great person and a doctor. And to pursue a same-sex relationship, obviously, and eventually over time the shame and the guilt of what he'd done, despite leaving, it compounded it, you know, because these children were distraught, the wife was distraught, and that ended in suicide. He was found in a motel out by the airport where he'd been for 3 days drinking himself into a stupor. And so, and had, at the end of that, taken his own life. And not only did he end up leaving his wife and 3 children, but his new partner as well.
Yeah.
Now, that's about 5 people devastated and affected, and who knows what damage now those children have brought into the world with their subsequent issues from that experience. And there's no judgment in that, but they would have. They would have struggled. So I really want to end all that, like, as much as you can affect the world. You know, what I'm saying is I want to have a positive effect by telling this story, is that I don't want to live in a world where things like that happen. Like, that's devastating. That is such a tragedy, right? But you've got to let everyone speak in order for that to happen.
That's
right. And that doesn't...
Some stories are paraded while others are lost.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that, you know, that's not a society in which publishers and academics go around telling people to shut up because this is only a positive story and this is how it is.
Telling you to deny your feelings.
So, in the spirit of lived experiences, and in the spirit of, you know, acceptance, and in the spirit of honesty and reconciliation, that's our story.
Yeah.
And we hope you'll treat it with the respect that it deserves.
Yes.
Yeah. Bye.